like they call Jesus God. They affirm some level of deity, and they affirm his death and resurrection.
Right, but then the Muslims have something that the Mormons don't, which is the divine attributes, the eternity of God, his simplicity, right? Him being all powerful, which is something very important. Because people think that Allah is a name, like, oh, the demon who appeared to Muhammad or whatever. Sure, that would be a false apprehension of God, but Allah's just the word for God. It's not like Jesus is a name.
But the Muslim in that case is referring to all of the other characteristics of Allah that we would deny. I am curious about the limiting principle for further, and I guess, well, a good example is the Mormons, which I think stemmed our first exchange on X.
Yes.
I probably don't remember, but how does this apply to something like Mormons who, and I'm not well versed in natural theology, but it would certainly seem like they worship God in some sense, in some referent. Would we say that they're worshiping God in the same way Muslims are?
I think the Mormons have it even worse. Yeah, it's weird because I think I haven't thought much about the Mormons because I think at first glance what I would say is, the Mormons and the Muslims, the Muslims miss something that the Mormons have, which is the idea about Jesus and, that there is such a thing as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right?
Yeah, like they call Jesus God.
Right. Say it again, sorry.
Like they call Jesus God. They affirm some level of deity, and they affirm his death and resurrection.
Right, but then the Muslims have something that the Mormons don't, which is the divine attributes, the eternity of God, his simplicity, right? Him being all powerful, which is something very important. So that's why I'm very hesitant to say that a Mormon can actually apprehend God at all. Let me give you this example. Do you agree? A Muslim comes and tells you, God, God forbid, Jesus is not God. What do you say? Do you agree with that statement? Jesus is not God?
No, I would disagree.
You would disagree, but notice what you're disagreeing to. The Muslim in that sentence, when he says the word God, he's referring to somebody, or he's referring to at least something. You know what I mean? So if we really believe that every time a Muslim said the word God, he's referring to some demon. And for the Muslim, or some idol, it doesn't have to be an actual demon that actually exists, perhaps like the one that appeared to Muhammad. Maybe just some idol he's creating in his head because he denies the Trinity and he denies the divinity of Christ. If we really believe that, then the Muslim definition of God or the referent of God is different than ours. And so I could tell a Muslim, you're right. When you, the Muslim, say Jesus is not God, you're right when you say that, because by God, you don't mean what I mean. But we don't say that. We say you're wrong and you're a blasphemer. Because I know that when they say God, they're referring to what Nasr Tate says. One God, subsisting in himself, creator of the world. Is that Jesus? Yes, that is Jesus. So that's why you're wrong, Muslim. That's why I don't think that you're right. Right? Now the Mormon is different, because the Mormon does not think that God created everything, because they think that, from my understanding, there's always the risk of strawmanning them, but from what I've heard, I don't care much about Mormonism. I don't study it. I don't plan on doing apologetics against it. So, but from what I've heard, they have this idea where, God the Father was once created, and he was a man. He lived, he died, and he became God, right? So when a Mormon says, Jesus is God, I would say I disagree with the way that they're saying that, because no, Jesus is not someone who was created and then died, and then lived a good life and died, and now was raised to the level of deity, and now has his own planet. I think that's kind of what they're saying. If I'm strawmanning them, I'm really sorry. But I think there's a big distinction there. The Muslim, when he says Jesus is not God, right? Most blasphemous sentence ever, of course, right? A sentence that only the Antichrist would say. But when they say that, I'm able to tell them you're wrong, because I know that when they say God, they're referring to what Nasr Tate says, one God, subsisting in himself, creator of heaven and earth, and so on. The Mormon is not referring to that. So that's why that's where my difference lies in Mormonism and Islam. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes. So if a Muslim came up to you and asked, "Is Jesus Allah?" you would just say yes.
Yeah, and well, in fact, Arabian and Eastern Christians who speak Arabic say Jesus is Allah. Because people think that Allah is a name, like, oh, the demon who appeared to Muhammad or whatever. Sure, that would be a false apprehension of God, but Allah's just the word for God. So it's not a name. It's not like it's not like Jesus is a name.
But the Muslim in that case is referring to all of the other characteristics of Allah that we would deny.
Like what? If they're referring to he's simple, eternal, one being, creator of heaven and earth, and I would say yes. Now if they're saying and I think that is what the normative usage of the word is among Muslims. I don't think they're always intentionally rejecting what so every time they go to prayer, my point is every time they go to prayer, they're not explicitly rejecting the Trinity and saying, and you God, who are only one person and not three, that would be false, sure, but they're not doing that in their mosque. And generally speaking, they're just saying, oh God, glory to you for creating heaven and earth, who are all powerful, who are eternal, and this and that.
Man, I wish I was more well versed on some of the characteristics that they attribute to Allah that we would deny.
So, I think you're getting
because it doesn't seem synonymous to me. Like, I wouldn't say the God of the Old Testament, let's say, that they are referring to is. I think that they have additions to that God that I wouldn't be comfortable in saying Jesus is Allah.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we established that you could technically say it to like an Arabian Christian, because Arabian Christians do say that. Like, right. That is the word for God.
I would agree with that. Yep.
Sure. So when it comes to the Muslims, though, I think you might be getting at, isn't there a path? And I don't know much about Islam. I do know that, I know the basics of like, and this is from what I've read also in the historical sources, the earliest Christians who lived during, the 7th century, who lived during as Islam was taking off, they do kind of, they appreciate that it's not polytheist and pagan and, pagan in that sense.
Right.
So at least they should affirm the divine attributes of simplicity and eternity and omnipotence. I've been told that like modern Muslims, might deny some of that, or that there might be multiple schools of thought in Islam where they deny the divine attributes and stuff like that. And in that sense, yeah, I think that would be more of a historical change in the beliefs of Islam. But also there's another interesting point where isn't there like a passage where it says that like Allah is the a liar or the creator,
father of lies or something like that.
Father of lies. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in Islam, and the people bringing up that passage probably aren't an expert in Islam. But I'm curious what would be. So if they think that if they are really saying that that God is able to, but then again, when I say God, we know who we're speaking about. So we know we're not speaking about some sort of idol. But if they're saying that God is able to produce falsehood, then yeah, that would be a false statement about God and therefore false. But that wouldn't change. That would be no different going back to the filioque example. That would be a false apprehension of God, because there is no such God that is three persons, and then the Holy Spirit proceeds only from the Father. That God does not exist, right? It's closer. Don't get me wrong; it's closer to the truth than Islam, but there's no such God either way. That's why it's so important to be in the. Again, I don't mean to be producing Catholic propaganda, but I think that's why it's so important to bring about unity and universality of faith in the whole world, to worship in spirit and truth. I think Christ has given the Catholic Church the means for that, which is like tradition and an infallible magisterium, to make sure that we, especially when it comes to God, that we have the right belief about God. And so, but again, I would say that the Orthodox is not always actively rejecting the filioque with every single act that they make towards God, and that's why I'd be willing to say, yeah, they worship the one God or the same God as us. But with Muslims, sure, they're even farther from the truth, and there's even more cases where they err about God, like if they were to say that God is a liar or whatever. But I still don't think that is for every single case. The Mormon, I'd have to think more about the Mormons to see if there even is such a case where they could refer to the true God. But right now, from what I thought about and from what I know about Mormonism, I don't think they could say that.
Yeah, some of this is a little bit historical question that I think is disputed. Like, I don't know if you saw Apostate Prophet's debate with Trent, but he was a former Muslim, and he's essentially saying, yeah, well, he essentially made the argument that Islam was founded on a bunch of lies that just co-opted a lot of Christian language.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a false religion, but that still doesn't change the fact that, you know,
but even in their conception of God, even what Muhammad was saying was God was pulling on a lot of pagan ideas to essentially add to whatever he was hearing the Christians of the time say. But that's a historical question. I'm not.
Yeah, I'm not so sure what would that even be, adding onto God. Well, sure, he certainly made up stuff that God never did. Like don't they believe that like Jesus wasn't really crucified or stuff like that, or that Christ never?
Well, it's certainly the case that they deny the divinity of Christ.
Right, and even something more accidental, like something even less essential. Something, you know, the divinity of Christ is a big deal. So something even maybe a little less essential would be like, you know, inspiring. They believe that God inspired the Quran, right? So if they were to say, you know, praise to you, O God, who inspired the Quran, I would say that's also false. But I think we just have to go back to Nasr Tate. Not trying to say that this settles the case. I'm just saying, what is Nasr Tate affirming? You know, they adore the one God. I'm losing it here. Sorry, I kind of lost it here. Okay, they adore the one God, living and subsisting himself. They affirm that. Merciful and all-powerful. They affirm that. Creator of heaven and earth. They affirm that. Again, I don't think the Mormons could really... When it says heaven and earth, we're not just talking about like this planet and, you know, the clouds as the Mormons would, and then, you know, you become your own God and you get your own planet. I think that's what they believe.
Right.
When we say heaven and earth in theology and you know, biblical language, we just mean, you know, the whole universe. When we say earth, and heaven is just mean, and you know, heaven and the creatures like the angels and the demons. But the Muslims can affirm that. I don't think the Mormons can actually affirm that. You know, spoke to Abraham. Well, we disagree with we both disagree what Muslims and Christians what God actually said to Abraham. That's why we don't. That's why the document doesn't say that. That we agree that that we both agree that he instituted the old covenant. You know, in this particular way that the book of Exodus and the Leviticus and all that talk about. It's just we just agree that he spoke to Abraham. So if a Muslim were to pray, you know, praise to you, O God, who are one, subsisting in yourself, creator of heaven and earth, and spoke to Abraham, like that is a true statement about God. And when they say God, they're not speaking like the Mormons and saying, well, you know, some man who became a god when he died or whatever. They really are speaking about that. So insofar as they can apprehend or affirm that truth, then I'd say they're apprehending God. But if they were to say something else like, you know, praise to you, O God, who appeared to Muhammad, that's a false statement. Or inspired the Quran or whatever.